Is it safe to come out? Is everyone still there? Is it over? Is it safe to come out? Anybody? It's been a while since I did a book review blast, and I've got a few books that I want to talk with you about today, but these books I didn't feel warranted a super long dedicated review, so you're just going to get the skinny on these books today, and I've got 4 books we're going to talk about. Before we get to it, please make sure, like, subscribe, join my Discord so we can talk more about books there. That would be awesome to have you. And with that being said, let's get right to these books. And we're going to start with White Sand. This is the graphic novel created by Brandon Sanderson, and it's part of the Cosmere universe that he's created. These were originally released as individual graphic novel editions, 3 volumes, and he recently did an Indiegogo campaign to release a new updated hardcover edition with a few minor changes added and full color illustrations. Everything is just absolutely beautiful. If you want to see my unboxing video for this, I'll leave a link in the cards at the end so that you can check that out. But this takes place in a world called Taldane. And on Taldane, there are people who can master the manipulation of sand. And there's one particular group known as the Sandmasters who are revered in this world for their use of sand, and something happens at the beginning of the book and they are all destroyed. And so there's one last Sandmaster remaining, and he can't do it very well. He has very limited ability, and this story focuses mainly on him, although there are other characters in the story as well. One of the other main characters in this story is Chrysala, and she is native to the dark side of Taldane. So on this planet you have a lighter side, a sunlit side, and then a darker side which is mostly lit by the moon. And there's sand on both planets as well, but it has different properties on her side than it does on his side, or on Kenton's side. Kenton is the other character that I should have mentioned his name. So she has come over to the sunlit side to see if there is a way to learn the mastery of sand that the Sandmasters of the light side of Taldane practice. And so it's just a really, really fascinating story. If you have read other Cosmere novels, you may be familiar with Chrysala, or Chris as she's more commonly known by her nickname. But that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to get into spoilers there. But it's a really, really great story. It didn't blow me away. It's pretty average by the standards of Sanderson. But average for Sanderson is actually really, really good. And so, the reading experience was greatly enhanced by all the color artwork. And the magic system is really unique. And I love the way it progresses and how you kind of have to charge it up, so to speak. So, it was pretty interesting. I enjoyed my time reading it. And I highly recommend it to you guys, okay? So next we're going to move on to the first book in the Hannibal Lecter series, and that is Red Dragon. If you're familiar with Hannibal Lecter at all, it's probably because of the movies or the television show Hannibal. Not a lot of people know about the Hannibal Lecter book series, and if they do, they don't talk about it. I've never heard anyone on BookTube talk about this series. So I wanted to see what all the hype was about. I'm a huge fan of the Hannibal TV series. I really like The Silence of the Lambs as well with Anthony Hopkins. I have not seen the other Hannibal Lecter movies, but I probably will eventually because I love Anthony Hopkins, and he's in all but one of them, from my understanding. This follows a character named Will Graham, who is brought in on a case by an FBI agent known as Jack Crawford. Jack and Will have a history together. Will has worked for the FBI before in more of a consulting capacity, and he has a particularly keen eye for details, so much so that he tends to relive the details of different cases that he's on, and that's how he is able to solve crimes. So Jack brings him in on a particular case that they've been unable to figure out. There is a serial killer going around killing women and their families. They've labeled him the Tooth Fairy because of the tooth marks that he leaves on people's skin. But as you progress through the story, you will realize that that moniker is really not best suited to him in his own opinion. But the details of the case bear it out that the Tooth Fairy is probably not a great moniker to know him by. Will Graham is brought in on this case. He's able to pin down some of the details, but it's just not really clicking for him. And so he ends up having to bring in Hannibal Lecter, popularly known as Hannibal the Cannibal, for eating his victims. Hannibal and Will have a history together, and the book doesn't really go into a lot of details about what their history is, but it's very clear Will is the one who fostered the apprehension of Hannibal Lecter. He is now in a maximum security prison setting, in a psychiatric hospital, and the few interactions that Will gets with Hannibal in the story just highlights what a brilliant character Hannibal is. This story is full of brilliantly written characters, not the least of which is Hannibal, but also Will, Jack Crawford, and so many others. The serial killer in this story is mind-bogglingly well written. I just had such a blast reading this. There was one section of the story where it kind of slowed down a little bit for me, and it was kind of dragging on. I'm like, okay, can we move along? But overall, I had a blast reading it, and I can't wait to read more. There's 3 other books in the series, and I will eventually be getting to all of those. So The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising are the other 3 books in the series. So it's going to be a really good time, I feel, at least just based on this book. I hope you guys pick it up. I think it's well worth your time. So, another book that I read that I wanted to talk about is Peter Pan. This is, of course, a classic kind of children's tale. There are things about it that I wouldn't necessarily label as good for children. Maybe, I don't know, but you know, that's my opinion. But overall, it is still a fairly well-rounded family affair if you want to read it to your kids and stuff. And for the most part, Disney did do a fairly good adaptation of it the first time around, and of course they've made other adaptations of it, one of which is Peter Pan and Wendy, which is exclusive to Disney Plus. I don't know if it's good. I haven't watched it. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the book. I thought it was quite fun at times. I really loved the character of Captain Hook. His character was probably the most well fleshed out of all the characters. And that's not saying much because we don't know a whole lot about him. We get little bits and pieces of his backstory. You get the classic tale of Peter Pan feeding his hand to the crocodile, and now he's on a streak of vengeance against Peter Pan, and he's going to feed Peter Pan to his hook, you know, that sort of thing. He's got his ragtag band of pirates that follow him, and they get up to these weird and crazy antics, and it's pretty good. It's not great. I didn't thoroughly enjoy my time reading it. There were aspects of it that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And some of it was intentionally nonsensical, I think. There's one point in the story where the father is so distraught that his kids have flown off with Peter Pan that he holds himself up in the dog's kennel until such a time that they might be able to find the kids. And so it's just kind of weird off the wall stuff like that kind of makes you, har har, kind of funny, but I don't know, it kind of made the story feel disjointed a little bit. And there were some things in the story that were rather dated, especially when it comes to discussing Native Americans. A lot of your standard Native American tropes, like the cowboys and the Indians, and the Indians scalping people and stuff like that. Just stuff that, while I understand that that was the time period and that's what they assumed in that time period about Native Americans, it still came off a little bit odd to me. It just felt off. But I wouldn't change that about the book. I think it's important to have those conversations with kids about why those stereotypes are wrong and how that was the stereotype that was promoted back in the day that this book was written. So I firmly believe it's important to have that conversation. But it was just kind of weird and made the book less enjoyable. And so ultimately, I'm glad I read the book. I did enjoy the themes of kids not wanting to grow up and trying to find ways to not grow up and go to an imaginary land where they never have to grow up, and then they start to forget their parents and they start to forget who they are as people, and then they realize that they really do need their mother and father and things like that. I thought that was really, really well done, but overall, I just didn't totally click with this story. So I wouldn't read it again, but I'm really, really glad I read it. And then the final book I want to talk about today is More Than a Vampire by J.R. Carroll. J.R. is a fellow booktuber and a fellow author. I had gotten this book for free when it was on sale. It was, I think it was a freebie giveaway on Amazon at one point, and so I just went ahead and grabbed it, and I had wanted to read it, and I'm really glad I did. The book takes a very different approach to vampires in many respects. There's the typical, we're going to drink blood so that we can survive, and we have to find humans to feed on and things like that, but it's very, very organized. And what I mean by that, it's organized in terms of a military system. So you've got Dracula way back in the day, the original vampire. He turns 4 other people into vampires that he chose, and he set them up as heads over his organization. So they have formed into 4 different cabals, and the leaders of those cabals each have their own ulterior motives and things they want to get out of the system, and they each have their own ambitions for leadership. And so they set up this vast organization headed up by the leaders of the cabals, but then it filters down into different ranks and tiers in the organization. And so one of the main characters in the story is Simon, and he belongs to one of the cabals, and he is a mercenary for this cabal. And even though the cabals all come from the same origin, they have become factions, so that it's frowned upon to intermix relationships and friendships from one cabal to another. And so Simon happens to meet a woman at a party who is also a vampire, but she is from a different cabal. And so already you've got this forbidden love trope that's happening here, which is fine. That didn't totally bother me, but it seemed like the crux of the story was Simon going on different projects and missions to eventually figure out some way to get back to his lady love and be with her in secret, and everything that happened in the book seemed set up for the sole purpose of finishing the mission so I can get back to my lady love. So that didn't totally work for me. I did think Simon was a really cool character. He got some decent character progression throughout the story. Some of it did feel rushed, some of it was not. So there was kind of a little bit of an imbalance there in his character progression. But overall, I felt like it was an interesting story, and he goes from being just a vampire to more than a vampire, which makes sense why the story is titled that way. And I have a feeling that all of JR's books are going to be someone who is thought to be one thing but becomes just a little bit more than that, because it is called the More Than Human series. So I'm excited to see where it goes. One thing that I thought was really cool that I don't see done a lot in books, and that is the subversion of the standard vampire trope being burned alive in the sun. In this story, vampires have extremely sensitive skin. So it will feel like their skin is on fire. It's like a really bad burning itch. If they're in the sun for too long, it can cause prolonged skin damage, but they don't necessarily spontaneously combust in the sun, which I thought was cool. I have seen that done in one other book that I read a long time ago, but I don't think that was done as well as this one was. The way that he developed that particular trait of the vampires in this story was quite well done. I thought a lot of the political intrigue was pretty interesting. I thought some of the missions Simon went on were quite fun. So overall, I ended up giving this a 3-star on Goodreads. So now let's talk about these 4 books in terms of my tier ranking. For White Sand, I would put that in my shiny tier. It's a good book, but it's not one that I would necessarily hoard. I read better Brandon Sanderson books. As far as Red Dragon goes, that book soars for me. That was just a fantastic read, and I can't wait to read more. Peter Pan is again in that shiny tier, maybe a little below that even. It's kind of in between boring and shiny. I'm not quite sure where to put that. For More Than a Vampire, I would put that in my shiny tier. So it definitely catches my eye, but it didn't blow me away either. So that is the end of my book review blast, guys, and I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. I thought it was pretty explosive. What did you think? Until next time, make sure you guys read more books. I'll talk with you soon. I read better Brandon Sanderson books.